My brother vanished 3 years ago after cleaning out my parents' savings, and his return was the final proof that I would never be more than an afterthought in my own family. I, David, 32, have always lived in the shadow of my older brother, Adrian, 35. Our relationship wasn't just strained. It was a frozen tundra of resentment and unspoken competition that I had long since lost the will to engage in. The source of this dynamic was painfully simple. Adrian was, and always had been, the golden child. In his youth, he was charming, athletic, and academically gifted, the perfect son. I was a quiet, studious one, reliable but never radiant. My parents, especially my father, Robert, clung to that faded image of Adrian's past glory like a life raft, refusing to see the man he had become. A chronically unemployed schemer whose primary talent was for manipulating them. His disappearance 3 years prior was both a shock and a grim inevitability. He hadn't just left. He had systematically drained a significant portion of my parents' retirement fund, money they had painstakingly set aside from the profits of their successful chain of local bakeries, the Rising Dough. He left a note blaming unspecified business pressures and a promise to pay it back, a promise we all knew was emptier than a bankrupt bakery at closing time. Instead of going to police, my parents, in a stunning display of denial, buried the incident. They told friends he had gone abroad for a fresh start, their shame and protectiveness outweighing their sense of justice. I had a good career as a supply chain manager for a large grocery conglomerate, a job I built on my own merits, far from the buttery scent of my family's world. But with my father devastated and the financial stability of the bakeries threatened, I felt a duty I couldn't ignore. I stepped in. I took a leave of absence, which soon became a permanent resignation, and dedicated myself to salvaging the business. I restructured supplier contracts, modernized the inventory system, and implemented a new marketing strategy that brought in a younger demographic. For 3 years, I worked 6, sometimes 7 days a week. I was the one who dealt with the anxious employees, the one who reassured my aging father, the one who poured my heart and soul into every aspect of the business. I saw it not just as a rescue mission, but as my legacy, the thing I had earned through sheer hard work. Then Adrian came back. It started with a series of tearful, late-night phone calls to my parents. He was sorry. He was lost. He had been in a dark place after a failed business venture of his own, a convenient lie that omitted his gambling addiction. He spoke of loneliness and redemption. My parents, whose hearts had never truly hardened against him, were putty in his hands. I argued with my father, pointing out the sheer audacity of Adrian's return. "He's my son, David." My father said, his voice thick with emotion. A father's love is supposed to be unconditional. I bit my tongue, the unspoken question hanging in the air. What about a son's loyalty? What about my 3 years of unconditional work? I was naive enough to believe that even if they welcomed him back into their home, they would never be foolish enough to let him near the business again. I was wrong. They organized a welcome home dinner at their favorite Italian restaurant. The air was thick with a forced cheerfulness that made my skin crawl. Adrian sat there, thinner, with a new weariness around his eyes, spinning a web of half-truths and manufactured remorse. Then, over tiramisu, my father made his announcement. With a proud smile, he clinked his glass and declared that he was looking forward to slowing down in the next few years, and that he was thrilled Adrian was home to take his rightful place and eventually take over the helm of the Rising Dough. The world seemed to slow down. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at my wife, Sophia, and saw my own shock reflected in her eyes. All those years of labor, all the sacrifices I'd made, reduced to nothing by a few weeks of hollow apologies from their prodigal son. I didn't scream. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the terracotta tiles. "I will not work for him," I said, my voice dangerously low. "If he's coming back into the business, I'm leaving. For good. The ride home was silent. Sophia held my hand, her grip tight. That night, I emailed my father my formal resignation. I had no job to go to, but my resume was strong, and my savings, while not extravagant, would buy us a few months. Sophia was my rock. You were absolutely right, she said, her voice firm. The idea of putting Adrian in charge of anything, let alone a multi-location business, after what he did is financial suicide. It's emotional insanity. My parents called for days, pleading. They used every weapon in their arsenal. Family, duty, forgiveness. He's your brother. My mother, Eleanor, wept. Can't you find it in your heart to give him a chance? My response was unwavering. I would not return unless they guaranteed, in writing, that Adrian would have no role, present or future, in the rising dough. The calls eventually stopped. The silence was more painful than the arguing. And then, as if scripted by the universe to vindicate me, the truth exploded. A little over a week after my resignation, my phone blew up late on a Tuesday night. It was my mother, hysterical. Between sobs, I pieced together the story. Adrian hadn't quit gambling. His redemption was a carefully constructed performance. He was deeper in debt than ever, had been fired from a series of low-wage jobs, and had only come home because he was out of options. His plan had been to slowly reintegrate himself and then ask for money, but his creditors were getting aggressive, and he'd panicked, demanding a huge sum immediately to clear his debts. When my parents, still reeling from the previous theft, refused, he had flown into a rage, called him selfish and heartless, and stormed out, leaving behind a trail of shattered delusions. Their call was a symphony of apologies and desperation. You were right, David, about everything, my father cried. We were blind. Please, you have to come back. The business needs you. We need you. I listened, a cold sense of clarity settling over me. I would not be their backup plan, the reliable son they could discard the moment their favorite showed a flicker of false hope. I'll come back, I said, my voice calm and steady. On one condition. You promote me to CEO, effective immediately. I want control of the company now, not in some vague future. The paperwork starts this week, or I hang up and start my job hunt tomorrow. The outrage on the other end of the line was palpable. My father spluttered about respect, about his life's work, about how I was trying to force him into retirement. He insisted a verbal promise should be enough. It's my way or the highway. I replied and ended the call. My mother texted frantically, but I sent one final message. You have 24 hours to decide. The next morning, the guilt trip began in earnest. My mother called, her voice thick with tears. She admitted my father's announcement had been a mistake, a nostalgia-based decision, thinking of the bright young man Adrian used to be. She said it was humiliating for my father to be forced out of his own company, that he wasn't ready to let go, that he'd been drinking and crying all night. He's blaming himself for everything. She wept. You're the only one who can fix this, David. I spoke to Sophia, and we wrestled with the guilt. They were my parents, and it was painful to hear them in such distress. But we both knew that caving in now would mean a lifetime of being the second choice. My stand was not just about a title. It was about respect, security, and finally being seen as an equal, not a contingency plan. After much reflection and discussion, Sophia and I are standing firm. My demand is not unreasonable. It's the bare minimum of security I need after the betrayal I've experienced. I've sacrificed 3 years for this business, and if I'm to dedicate my future to it, I need a guarantee that my position is secure. It's been a few days of radio silence from my parents, which I've used to seriously consider my options. The truth is, I want to go back to the rising dough. I've developed a real affinity for the business. I enjoy the challenges. I have a great rapport with the bakers and shop managers, and the thought of building something from scratch elsewhere is daunting. The fact that my return would mend things with my parents is a secondary benefit, not the primary motive. The major obstacle remains my father's pride. He's in his late 50s, still full of energy, and the idea of handing over the reins is anathema to him. This isn't just about being CEO in name. It's about ownership, control, and the final say. I'm not asking for too much. I'm asking for what I've earned. I went to see them this evening. The atmosphere was heavy with unspoken recriminations. My father was silent, a brooding presence in his armchair, while my mother did the talking. She accused me of being greedy and distrustful. Just because we made a mistake with Adrian doesn't mean you can hold us hostage, David. You need to learn to trust your family, she chided. Then she made her masterstroke, or so she thought. You should be grateful you even had this opportunity. If your father hadn't asked you to help when Adrian left, you'd still be working for someone else. That comment ignited a cold fury within me. He asked for my help because he needed it. I replied, my voice sharp. I did him a favor. I saved his business. Don't you dare reframe it as a favor he did for me. That finally broke my father's silence. He admitted, his voice ragged, that yes, he had needed my help, and he needed it again now. He looked old and defeated, and for a moment my resolve wavered. But I held firm. I explained, as kindly as I could, that I loved the business, that I had invested more myself in over the last 3 years than I ever had in my previous corporate job. But his public announcement, handing my legacy to Adrian without a second thought, had been a profound humiliation and a betrayal. I couldn't simply pretend it never happened. Then, for the first time in my life, I let it all out. I spoke of a childhood spent in Adrian's shadow, of the time he was immediately offered a place in the family business after college, while I was encouraged to find my own path, of always feeling like the consolation prize. I told them my motivation for joining 3 years ago was always the hope of one day inheriting what I was building. It wasn't a secret. It was a logical conclusion of nepotism, which they themselves had created. It wasn't out of some deep, familial love that they had done little to foster. My mother was the first to crack. She apologized, saying she never realized how neglected I had felt. I couldn't tell if it was genuine, but it was a start. Then my father spoke, his voice low and full of regret. He apologized for his favoritism, for not seeing my worth, for taking my reliability for granted. Hearing them acknowledge it after a lifetime of silence was profoundly satisfying. It felt like a wall had begun to crumble. I told them the past was the past. What mattered was the future. I needed their decision. My father, after a long pause, said he still couldn't bring himself to retire and hand over the company completely. But he proposed a compromise. He would have his lawyer draw up a legally binding contract, stipulating that I would become the CEO and majority owner upon his retirement, with all the details laid out clearly. I could have my own lawyer review it. It was a practical, sensible solution. We agreed to proceed on those terms. It's been 2 weeks. The legal paperwork has been reviewed by my lawyer, and the terms are solid. The contract is ironclad, securing my future as the head of the rising doe. I'll be returned to work in a week, not as a resentful underling, but as the acknowledged successor. I know some might see my decision to return as a capitulation, a failure to fully break free. But this was the most practical choice for my family. Revenge is a luxury I can't afford. I have a mortgage, a son in a good school, and a lifestyle built on 2 incomes. Walking away from a sure thing out of pride would have been irresponsible. I didn't swallow my pride. I made my pride work for me by securing my future on my terms. I didn't compromise, and I am no one's doormat. Since our confrontation, there's been a noticeable shift in my parents' behavior. They are more respectful, more conscious of my boundaries. The dynamic has changed. Even if our relationship never becomes a picture-perfect family ideal, my primary goal, securing the CEO position, has been achieved. That's what matters most. 3 months have passed since I returned to the rising dough. Work has been consuming in the best way possible. My absence was explained as an extended vacation, which sufficed to quell office gossip. Professionally, my father and I have found a new rhythm. He still handles the day-to-day operations he enjoys, like recipe development with the head baker, while I manage the broader business strategy. It's a partnership now, not a dictatorship. On a personal level, we're tentatively navigating a new relationship. We've instituted bi-weekly family dinners. My son, Alex, adores his grandparents, and his joy fills the room, making the encounters easier. We had avoided the elephant in the room for a while, but last week, during a dinner where it was just my parents and me, they brought up Adrian. They confessed he had been calling them, his situation growing increasingly desperate. The debts were massive, and the threats from his creditors were becoming more serious. But, to my immense relief and pride, they told me they had held firm. They told him they would not give him a single cent, that he had made his bed and had to lie in it. They were done enabling him. I felt a bitter twinge of jealousy hearing concern in their voices, the lingering heartbreak over the son they had lost. But then my mother looked at me, her eyes welling up, and said, "But more than that, David, we regret what we did to you. We were so focused on the son. We were losing that we didn't appreciate the son we had. We failed you." My father nodded, his own eyes glistening. "We don't know how to fix the past. We're trying, but it will never be enough to make up for it." My mother broke down then, sobbing in a way I had never seen before, apologizing over and over for being a terrible mother. The raw, unfiltered grief in her voice broke through my own carefully constructed emotional walls. For the first time, I allowed myself to be vulnerable with them. I told them that what mattered was that they were trying now. They had screwed up, but I was here, giving them a second chance, and they were taking it. That had to count for something. I told my mother to stop crying, that we couldn't change the past, but we could build a better future. We spent the rest of the evening in a somber but strangely connected state. Before I left, my father hugged me, a rare, genuine embrace, and thanked me for giving them this chance. "We failed both our sons," he whispered. His voice choked. "We spoiled one and ignored the other." I didn't disagree. Adrian's downfall wasn't entirely their fault. He was a grown man who made his own choices, but their constant coddling had stripped him of any resilience. There was nothing to be done for him now. The focus had to be on the present. When I got home, I recounted the evening to Sophia. She hugged me and said, "This is good, David. This is real. It's messy and painful, but it's honest. It's better than pretending." She was right. I don't know if we will ever have a perfect storybook family. The scars of a lifetime don't fade easily. But there is effort now. There is acknowledgement. There is a legally binding contract in my safe and a newfound respect in my parents' eyes. I am no longer living in my brother's shadow. The bakery, with its warm, comforting smell of fresh bread and yeast, finally feels like it belongs to me. And for the first time, I believe that my parents finally see the man who is always there, patiently waiting for his turn in the sun. The future, for the first time, feels entirely my own.